Hi parents, welcome to Grade 7 Social Studies. I am Mr. Stefosic and I am excited to welcome you this year to back in person learning for social studies for grade 7. I'm excited to have your student in class. I'll try and keep this pretty brief. I know that you are going through a lot of videos right now, so I'll start off with just a kind of overview of who I am and then I'll get right into what we're going to be doing in social studies. As I said, I'm Mr. Stefosic. I'm an educator, a reader, a runner. I have been in education for a while. I'll talk about that in just a moment. I'm an avid reader. Every morning I like to sit down and have a book and just kind of keep up with all of those things that are going on in both fiction and nonfiction, but I'm generally a fiction reader. And if you have a student in cross country right now, I am also one of the cross country assistant coaches. I went to Mason for my degrees and I loved it. I was lucky enough to be there when we did the run to the Final Four, so it was quite an exciting time when I was there my first year. And then a little about my philosophy. I am very concerned about helping students to appreciate who they are and to see the things they love are important and often help them learn. I try and really focus on bridging that gap between students feeling like the stuff I do outside of school is not connected to the stuff that I do inside of school. I want them to see that those things are important and they will help them become better students as the year goes on. A little about my teaching background. I've been in teaching for 10 years now, and this is my first year at ASL and also my first year in London. So I'm very excited to be here and to get to experience London as well as get to experience and be teaching at ASL. I've also taught in the US, Alaska, China, and South Korea. Um, I've enjoyed all of those places. The one most students end up remembering is when I tell them about Alaska because I was in a rural Native Alaskan village in Bush, Alaska. So it's about 2 hours outside of Fairbanks. It's quite an experience, but it's definitely not for everybody. Getting those cold temperatures during the winter were sometimes rough, but I loved every minute of it. So that is a little about me. I now want to jump into what we're going to be doing for Soul Studies for this year. Um, Sorry about that. We always know technology will have something unique to pop up for us. Our Soul Studies goals for this year, and I say "are" because it not only includes what we're doing in my class, but I work with Miss McAllister, the other 7th grade Soul Studies teacher, and we work together to make sure that all of 7th grade Soul Studies is doing the same thing. So ours connects both hers and mine. So we want our students to make connections between historical events, current events, and their lives through developing an understanding of how people interact with others and their environments, develop an understanding of issues related to our thematic units, take ownership over their learning by generating questions and gathering multiple sources of evidence, and take action based on their inquiry project work and to share their new understandings in authentic settings. And I will kind of expand on these goals over the next couple slides. So our concept-based units that we're going to be covering are identity and perspective, power in the British Empire, and change and post-colonialism. Our first unit will be identity and perspective, and it's going to allow students to build their identity literacy in order to first understand themselves, who they are, build awareness about the world around them, and then this helps them to understand those perspectives that might be coming through the history that they read or the things that they understand. It's really important for them to kind of see that they have a perspective so that when they're reading historical narratives or historical works, they understand that that historian might be coming from a perspective as well. This helps them to solidify their understanding that there are lenses, and those lenses help us understand the world around us, but also how the world has got to where it's at. Um, Once we kind of solidify that, we move on to our second unit, which is power in the British Empire. So in this unit, students will examine types of power and read historical works examining how power was gained, used, shared, and lost during this time of expansion for the British Empire. They will further inquire into impact of power and colonialism on both the past and present day. So it's really now they're starting to see like, oh, these events in the past do actually affect where we're at in the present. So it's our consistent connection throughout the units is really helping the students see where they're at, see how they actually are reading history, and how history affects how we read history. So how does history and the things that are presented to us affect how we understand it? Our final unit will be change and post-colonialism, and this will be when students will work to understand how change occurs and why it happens. They'll be looking really closely at historical evidence at the end of the British Empire, as well as current events. So, what is going on in our contemporary world? How might have things during the British Empire affected those? How might things in history in general affected the way things are now? And this is where we start to help them to think of their own questions they have for history and how might they go into learning about analyzing, finding facts and information and presenting those facts and information to possibly create change in their own community and help us understand the world that's around us, both historically and in current times. So these are our three major units that we'll be covering, and they're all interconnected really through helping them first set up how do we understand history, then going into how does history connect to the way the world works now, and then how does history not only affect how the world works now, but how we understand different places and different events happening beyond just our kind of day-to-day scope. In social studies, we have three major standards. So these are the standards that we'll be reporting on and we'll be looking to see students grow within. The first one is inquiry, research, and evaluation. So just for students to be asking questions, collecting evidence, evaluating sources, those very typical kind of traditional things we think of when it comes to analyzing really anything, but history in particular. So, how do we ask a question? How does that question guide us to what evidence we're going to find? And then, how do we know that the evidence we're finding is valid evidence, not just stuff that people are kind of deciding or maybe creating to try and present as valid? Then we get into, or our next standard, not getting into, these will be throughout the year, but our next standard will be knowledge and understanding. So then now we have this evidence. How do we analyze it? What do we do with it? How do we understand that evidence? And then how do we take these different pieces of evidence and connect them together? Do they all meld together? Do they show us one conclusion, or are there multiple conclusions to draw from this evidence that we're looking at? Our final standard is communication. So this is where students are not only verbally communicating, but also writing. So written communication. Part of that will be blogging. They'll be able to communicate with each other, and then they will also have conversations on those blogs through comments so that they can respond to the way each other presents ideas. There is also some social justice standards that will be within our social studies standards, and those are based on identity, diversity, justice, and action. So helping them, those are kind of where our units come from, is both the standards that we're looking at for social studies and our social justice standards and tying them all together. So seeing that history has affected where these elements of social justice are. The skills that we'll be looking at are, of course, nonfiction reading skills. History is mostly nonfiction. We very rarely get into a fiction reading, but we'll be looking at nonfiction reading. We'll be looking at how we evaluate sources, how we analyze those sources, how do we take notes when we're reading through sources, synthesizing the information presented in different sources to find new meaning. Not just saying, oh, this is what it says, but these are the things we might gather from looking at multiple sources, and these are what these things together might be arguing. And then finally, communicating findings to real world audiences. So we're not just writing to our teacher, we're writing to our peers, we're writing to somebody outside of the school who might be wondering kind of what our student views on ideas. Parents might be wondering too, and that's where I'll get into the next one, where you'll be able to see some of their writings to see how they're communicating to the real world audiences. So, our organization will be two things, and one, I'll actually start off with blogs because that'll connect to our previous slide. So students will be communicating on their blogs, they'll be communicating with each other, but that is also out there to present to others. So you are welcome to check out their blogs and see what your student is writing. And how they're analyzing and understanding history and our present day and seeing our standards kind of come to fruition. And also Schoology is where all of our resources will be posted. So if a student needs something, they'll be able to get on there and they'll be able to access what they need. And then finally, just often parents want to know, well, what can I do to ensure that my child does well in class? So there's four major points that we recommend. The first one is just to encourage self-advocacy. If your student's saying that they're struggling or that they don't understand something, just reminding them that they should come and talk to us. We often will see things, but sometimes students are getting good grades, but they're actually struggling about something else. So it's good to help them, remind them that yes, I can go and talk to my teachers, or I can talk to the people that I need so that I can do better in this class. Homework will also be a max of 30 minutes per class, so they shouldn't be overwhelmed with homework, but just enough to kind of extend their learning from what they've done in class. Also, to encourage your child to focus on the learning and not on the grade, because they'll be seeing if they're achieving the standards throughout the year. It's not so much of like, oh, I did well in this test, but have I understood or have I learned well what I'm supposed to learn? And then finally, talking with your child, which I'm sure you already do, but just, knowing the things that they're doing, and then even if they write something on their blog, just having those conversations with them, just, helps that connection for them often, which we love connecting to what they're doing at home, just a way for you to connect with them what they're doing in class as well. With that said, I do look forward to working with you and your child this year in Soul Studies. I'm think it'll be a really fun year now that we're kind of getting back to, don't want to say a norm, but maybe that new norm as they're kind of mentioning. So this new norm, it's great to have students in class, and getting their kind of smiles and laughters back in class is one of my favorite parts of teaching. Also, we'll be on a Q&A from 8:20 to 8:50 this evening, so you can kind of ask questions there, or if you'd like to email me, you're more than welcome to. With that said, I thank you and appreciate you taking the time to listen to this presentation, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening. See you at the Q&A.